Welcome to Practical Talk. I'm Heather, a first-generation entrepreneur and founder of Holloway Media Services. My intention with this podcast is to teach entrepreneurs how to advance their careers with practical business advice. I'm talking about real actions you can take to grow any aspect of your business. The entrepreneurs on this podcast are not just telling you their stories, they're sharing their secrets to success, and it starts right now. If you're enjoying this topic at any moment, please share the episode with your network. Post it on social and tag us. And if you haven't yet, go subscribe, rate, and review this podcast. Thank you. Joining me today is my very special guest and friend, Tiffany Youngren. She is a podcast marketing expert with OMH Agency. You can find her on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, and omhagency.com. But Tiffany built several successful businesses and assisted other entrepreneurs to do the same for 30 years. She started OMH Agency in 2016 to help companies grow revenue and launched her first podcast episode in 2017. After working with and consulting dozens of seasoned podcasters, Tiffany added a robust podcast host development and booking platform in 2020. Ooh, the year of COVID. That was fun. She started this to support other agencies in providing the best podcast development and booking services to their clients. Tiffany lives in Billings, Montana with her husband of 29 years. Aw, that's cool. And she spends as much time as possible with her kids and 7 grandkids. Tiffany, thank you so much for joining us to talk about podcasting. We have the expert on here today.
Heather, thank you so much for inviting me. I cannot wait to talk to you this morning. I was very excited to get to spend some time with you.
Oh my gosh, that's a pure joy. Thank you so much. So yeah, here we are. We are on a podcast talking about podcasts. And ladies and gentlemen, we are talking to the person that started in 2017. You've helped dozens of seasoned podcasters out there doing their thing. And so why podcasting, Tiffany? Why podcasting?
Well, it started a little bit accidentally. Like you, I believe a lot in content marketing. So getting out there, organic content, blog posts, so really when I started OMH Agency, I had what I called my secret sauce, where you have a website and that's the core. And every page on your website is like an employee who should have a job to do and a way to do it. And from there, it was all about having a blog post that was answering the most boring, basic, fundamental questions that your clients are always asking, because guess what? They're looking it up on Google. You should be the one that they see. From there, it was all about, having an email campaign that goes back to the blog post and then social media that goes back to the blog post. After about a year, we had, and I don't even think it was a year, it was just a few months into our company, I had a client who was a home inspector. And, you do content. So, sometimes when you're doing the formal editorial calendar and things like that, imagine how boring it was for my poor writer. We're going to write about all the topics related to home inspection. And this home inspector was in Seattle, Washington. And I don't know if any of you who are from Washington State, from especially Western Washington, mold is an issue. It's a major issue. And if you're in home inspection, your clients are constantly asking you about mold. And so for me, I was like, we have to talk about mold, but these guys are awesome. It's like one of the best home inspectors. They have the great remediation for it. And so anytime we would write a blog post about mold, they would get frustrated. They would rewrite it. They'd be like, every time you guys write, but we're just using high level sources and, going to the top, like, what are they saying? What does the CDC say? And they still would just be so frustrated. And they're like, stop writing about mold. So I called them and I'm like, look, that's unacceptable. Like, we have to write about mold. Like, if you don't write about mold,
the people are demanding mold information.
I know. And see how boring it is. But that's the fact. Like, people try to be too fancy, right? Yeah. So they're like, I want to be flashy. And I'm like, no, you want to be found. You want, when people are looking up mold, you want to be the one that comes up. And if you're not writing, and it comes up, like, it's, if you do a search, like if you do a scan, like it comes up a lot. Like, it's a high search term and not that competitive. negative. And so I'm like, no, this is gold. For years, you're going to be at the top of this list. And so finally I said, look, I'm going to record an interview with you guys and we're just going to do some blog posts out of it. And I feel like it wasn't a podcast, but I feel like that was my grain that started my passion for taking these interviews and creating the space where business owners who don't want to have anything to do with marketing, they're like, I just want to hire somebody, make me famous, right? Like it's just, I want everybody calling us for this, for our industry. I want to be the one. Yeah. And I was so driven to do that. And as a business owner, like I was in my early 20s when Dwayne and I started businesses. And so I'm like, I get it. I know about overhead. I know about busting out and being noticed when everybody else is competing for the same space. And then having that voice, like having the voice of the business owner when the business owner is like, dude, seriously, I have a job to do. I can't be fussing with blog posts, like even looking through an editorial calendar, they're like, do I have to do this? Or, Yeah. And so from there, in 2017, I started hearing about, podcasts, and I had an assistant and she brought it to me and she's like, this is you. Like here's this article about podcasting and this is how you approach marketing. It's how you approach content. You should totally do this. You should have a podcast. And if you don't think you should read this article and then you're going to be sold. So I was like, this is great. And I had moved to Billings in 2012 and I still was having a hard time really getting to know people and getting to know the business community. I felt a little bit like, I felt like an alien, quite honestly, let's just be real. And so I just was, I loved the people I was meeting, but I just was having, it snows all the time. We're all kind of holed in. We were just social distancing before it was cool. So it's like, okay, a podcast. And then I'm going to interview business owners, but I also want to interview like nationally known people or globally known people. And even before that, I'd written a book and I'd done exactly the same thing where I wrote a book about fitness. And so I interviewed all these like Guy Laud, who was like an Olympian. And then I also interviewed like local fitness people. And so I kind of took that experience and I thought, I want to do the same thing where I'm getting to know locals. I'm getting to know Neil Patel, who's like, the guru of SEO. Like I think I only had about 20 episodes total on my first podcast. It was called Chat and Grow. It's still published if anyone wants to look it up, but all these voices are relevant. If we're not on the street talking to people fighting the fight, while we're also bringing in the brightest minds that we know in the space, I just have a natural curiosity. And so it really became a selfish version of what I was doing for my clients. And so I'm like, I'm just going to like take all this out of it. Although I have a huge passion for SEO and using that content, it was more about meeting people. If I didn't meet people, I wouldn't have done it because even though I know it's important for me to have content, it's just easier for me. Like I can just write blog articles. I have my own voice. Like it's just easy. Yeah. But I really wanted to meet people. And so I didn't offer podcasting services. I continued to do the same structure that I'd always done because it worked. And I was making, my clients were making a lot more money. They were getting leads. And so I just kind of puttered along and I didn't really want to make systems around podcasting because I liked how I did it. And I didn't want my clients like messing with my system. So I was like, I'm just going to do it. I just love it. Well, then the great pivot of 2020, it wasn't a coincidence that I went into podcasting. I had by then shut down Chat and Grow because someone had brought up this idea of not only meeting the right clients and collaborators through podcasting, which I already was doing and absolutely loved. I was starting to get introduced to these concepts of, micro content and doing it deliberately instead of before we were just kind of doing it, but doing it as like a core part of our marketing strategy. But then more importantly, meeting my best clients. So writing down who are my best clients and how can I get in front of them and how can I make that something that people want to listen to? So I started a podcast called Breakaway Agents. I was marketing for real estate agents. I've been in real estate. My husband and I were agents in the early 90s. It was the kind of websites I was building in the 90s were real estate. So, I can market real estate in my sleep. I know how to, get clients. I know how to close deals. So I was like, this is easy. I know how to talk to real estate. They're my people. So I started Breakaway Agents and I only interviewed people who sold over 20 million in real estate. And so I only wanted top producers because I didn't want to talk anyone into marketing. I didn't want anybody to go, I'm just going to go out and do referrals. Like I didn't want those people. I just wanted people who understand marketing, and interviewed them. And it was awesome. And I don't know if you probably realize this, but getting in front of real estate agents as a marketer is very difficult. And so if you're going in front of the top ones, they typically have assistants and, so there's quite a barrier. I was like, I'm going to test this. And I always use my podcast for testing. So as people are listening to them, just keep that in mind. I'm always testing when I'm doing my show. So I did these very deliberate about who was on my show. And the system worked great. I was able to bring in clients. They were high ticket clients. Everything was happy. 2020 hit. And I had actually at the time, I had 2 business coaches that were helping me. And both of them out of the clear blue sky independently went, you should just show people how you podcast because it's crazy. Like, because I have a natural curiosity. So share with people like how to express that in a podcast, but then also how to use this meeting people and developing relationships while also caring about the listener. So that part of it, but also the micro content. So that's how all that evolved into what we do now. That's my story.
Yeah.
Stick it to it.
Holy smokes. All right. That was Fast and Furious. Tiffany, from 2017, that's when you recorded your first podcast episode, to now 5 years later, having your own system where you're helping other podcasters grow and do their thing. There are so many questions that I have written down here. So first of all, I can't help myself, but I'm a content creator. So I'm going to need you to come out with the blog post, Mold to Gold, baby. Mold to Gold. Because, I want to know.
I love that.
So I can't stop. I can't help myself. You talk to those guys. You're like, look, the people want mold. Let's talk about mold. Can you remember, did that do anything for their business when you started blogging about mold? What did that do for them?
Well, honestly, at the time, nobody was on Twitter really in that community. And they were getting people on Twitter. They were getting clients just reaching out, because the way that we did it, I made my clients, they had to have a Twitter account. They had to have a Facebook account. We helped them set, Google Plus and LinkedIn. So they had to have those 4 platforms. And I didn't care if they ever went on them. I know that we usually optimized for their favorite platform so that the content was really geared for that so they could have a conversation. But the rest of them, it was so soon for people who weren't generally online anyway, that I just wanted the SEO, right? I wanted those links out there. If someone picked it up, great. And I always I told them, they would come to me and they'd say, we don't do Twitter. Nobody does Twitter. And I was like, I know you think that, and that's fine. It's not going to cost you any more or less, whether you do Twitter or not, but I will be frustrated because I know it's going to give you a bump. Well, they got a client within the first month. And I had also told them, you will not get a new client in the first 3 months, probably, because this is a grassroots organic campaign. We're setting expectations. Fortunately for them, they, especially at the time, were in an industry that had very little competition. So it was easier to rank very quickly. But on Twitter, I was surprised that they got a lead right away on Twitter.
Wow. From mold to gold, baby. That is your case study. I'm going to need to see a blog post on that. Okay.
Love it.
All right. So listeners, if you're out there and you want to get into podcasting, can you tell us the benefits of podcasting? When we first got together, Tiffany, and we're like, okay, what do we want to talk about? Obviously podcasting, but you're telling me it's the number one way to build relationships. And I think there are 2 relationships that you're building.
Correct.
One with the guest and one with the listeners. Can you explain why podcasting is the number one way to build a relationship?
Absolutely. And my approach, just like when I said we would post these posts on all these different platforms, you really have to pick one. So if you're not talking to one, you're not talking to any. So I feel like when you're talking to guests and listeners, you're really doing that, right? So right now you're talking to me, but you're talking to, hi, everybody else. Like you all are here, right? So we're all in the same room. But the fact of the matter is I'm right in front of you. And then the content that we're creating is for the benefit of people who theoretically in the room. As we speak, we're imagining them in the room, but they don't enter the room till later. And so everything that we're doing is just out of a heart for providing value to that group. So as a host, you don't get to you get to have this conversation with your guest, but then there's like everybody else. So when that relationship starts in the planning, So the planning process is really where you're going, who is my listener? How can I provide value? And then what are our next steps? Because if you're just dropping bombs and walking out of the room, I think it's rude. So you really want to be thinking about, where do I want this relationship to go? Yeah. So that needs to be part of the planning process so that as you're developing content, you can fulfill it. The second part is my own personal, I optimize for the guests. Because whether it's family, whether it's business, proximity wins, right? We've got friends, we've got family who live out of state. But those ones who are in state, those ones who are at all the soccer games, like them or not, or, whatever, you're going out on a Friday night. If you're seeing them, they win. You don't even have to like them as much. But those are the ones that get your time, they get your attention. And that the same holds true for guests. And so as I'm planning a show, so after Breakaway Agents, my current show is Next Step Nation. We're actually developing another one called Tales from the Arena, and which is just a passion project. I have very little agenda outside of that. It's kind of back to the chat and grow roots. But at the end of the day, the time that I spend with my guests, everything I do is optimized for that. I trust what I did during my planning process. So when I developed the show and I look at my audience and I look at the path and I look at the journey, I trust that I put the right stuff into that so that as I'm going, okay, who are my guests? I'm very deliberate about who comes on my guests. These days, you can put a post anywhere and you're going to have more requests than you will know what to do with.
Guest requests?
Guest requests, yes.
Yeah.
You're also going to find that PR people are pitching you constantly, right? So I was getting PR requests. So as a host, usually you're running a business or you're doing something else. And then the podcast is this other thing, right? Mm-hmm. And so as I'm coaching my clients, I'm telling them that hour that you spend with your guest is so valuable. And there are ways to optimize it, right? Mm-hmm. And so we work during the planning stage on number one, who do you want on your show? Because who do you want to meet? It's not just about they need to provide great content. Otherwise you probably wouldn't want to meet them. Right. So that just comes, but so I have people on my show and I'm sometimes I don't want to have a relationship with them after, but it's a really intense way to get to know what is the next step. Is it okay, it was nice meeting you. I'll see you. Yeah. Whatever. Yeah. Or it's oh my gosh, let's do something together, or let's, what's going to happen after this. But there's always this kinship after too. That was such a great relationship. That was such a great hour. You really used my time well. So whether I have somebody who, again, is a local person that, is running a business, or if it's a best-selling author that carved out an extra 15 minutes more than they normally will carve out, I put that same amount of care and attention and focus on how can I make that hour be valuable for that person, and then helping them ahead of the show be comfortable so they know what's going to happen, having the time spent during the time. You did a fantastic job too, Heather. Let me just say, your show, love it. You did a great job. But that's always what I'm looking for is how can you make it so that, because I don't care if the person was on a TV show the day before, when they show up to your show, a lot of times they're nervous. If they don't have their own podcast, they're just oh my gosh, you're really I've seen your show, it's produced. And I'm dude, it's just me. I don't even know, Yeah.
It's obvious to you, but it's not to them. Yeah. And totally scary. Yeah. The relationship is totally important. Then you have the relationship with the listeners, but really quickly, if you're just getting into podcasting, you don't need to recreate the wheel, right? Like for me, I sort of just took bits and pieces of different, I didn't copy, but I got inspired by a way that, somebody opens their podcast, or a way that somebody promotes their podcast and asks subscribers to listen and rate. And so if you listen to top podcasts, start to pick up themes, because these guys are going to do it over and over and over again. And guess what? You need to do the same thing too, right? So you don't have to recreate the wheel, right?
No, absolutely. And a couple things as you're talking about that. Number one, that's brilliant. But you have to remember, you and I are content creators.
Yeah.
So if people are out there listening, usually when people come to me, they're they've got these really altruistic ideas about but they're but I'm really busy and I don't want to do any of it myself. So even looking at inspiration for their cover art, usually that's one of the first things I have them do, just to open them up to the idea of expanding. Like you were talking about, I'll ask them what kind of shows do you listen to? a lot of people don't listen to a lot of podcasts,
Oh,
so
rule number one, consume the content you want to create.
Yeah. However, I would never cut someone out of the conversation of having a podcast because I believe so much in the content and the relationships. When I did Breakaway Agents, okay, this is my big reveal, although I've said it about 1 million times, but honestly, I did not care how many listeners I had. I made that show for my guests, and I made that show so I could meet them. And I made that show because I wanted content, and I got a ton out of it. So I got business, I got high ticket clients, and I got listeners who still contact me through Breakaway Agent. I haven't produced a single episode for like 2 or 3 years, but I still
you are my spirit animal.
Oh gosh.
Like I want to be you when I grow up. Like you're blazing this path before me. But as I'm in it, and listeners, as you're in it, or first generation entrepreneurs or new entrepreneurs out there, if you're thinking about starting a podcast, this stuff works. Tiffany is but a few years ahead of me. I'm doing what Tiffany is saying, and I'm very excited about my future. I got to put shades on.
I love it. Heather, you're awesome. Well, and the thing is too, is like, there's so much advice, especially right now. It seems to me like we were at, there are 500,000 episodes. Look at how many that is. That's just amazing. There are so many. There's like over 2 million. I stopped even looking because I just felt like but remember, there are billions of blogs, billions. And it's still, I feel like that is the best way to get visitors. And so, and honestly, I'm no further ahead. I feel like I do everything. I don't do everything wrong, but I'm constantly testing. There's like a million ways to win. So it's really, if you don't love doing the podcast, it's hard to sustain because at the end of the day, it is a lot of work. You're either going to have to put a lot of time or some money into it. It's just like absolutely any endeavor. It's one or the other. But because it's so popular now, there are so many resources, whether it's reading for free, how to do it yourself. But again, that's going to take time. So if you're so busy, you're like, I just want other people to handle it. Yeah. Now that it's so popular, everybody helps people with podcasts. So,
they help you with podcasts, but they can't replace you. And you are the secret sauce to your business. So you do at least have to show up on the microphone and commit to at least 2 hours of work. You need show prep. And then you need to record the show. And then after that, you can dump it off to somebody, but you still need to show up. So, I know I'm doing things wrong and I'm learning as I go. So what are some of the common mistakes that we make as little baby podcasters?
Well, I don't think it's little baby podcasters. I think that in general, the things that I see people miss, even experience, on my show, Next Up Nation, we have a hot seat series where all I do is consultations. I literally bring on podcasters. And I thought that, I require that people have already recorded at least 10 episodes because I feel like you have better questions once you just do a few wrong. In fact, I tell my clients that let's not talk until you've recorded 3 episodes because I feel like we have a lot more to talk about after that.
Yeah. You're exposed.
What you're talking about, making mistakes, you literally have to find your voice. And before you can do that, you just have to let go and stop. And there's a lot of perfectionists who want to do podcasts and control freaks, which I love you. I love them. I feel like they're my people. I understand. I've loved the advantage of just forcing yourself to be okay with screwing up. But one of the things that I think is a huge mistake is just letting any old person be on your show. I think that you really need to, what you were talking about a minute ago was gold, where there are certain things that you can delegate and there are certain things you cannot delegate. And I think as a business owner, as any entrepreneur, getting good at that is really the difference between being a rookie and being a pro, because then you understand, I cannot delegate that, or you're setting up systems to eventually delegate. You're constantly in that state. And for podcasters, you cannot replace having the vision for who will be on your show and the final okay. So for myself, I always look at, there's an application. So they fill out an application and I'm like, yes, no, whatever. I know what I'm looking for. And then so that you can't replace, you also cannot replace doing the interview.
Right.
And taking some kind of notes or having some kind of direction for the team. So for example, I do the hot seat series. I take notes during the show. It's the most weird, different show I've ever done because it talk about messy. Like, I don't know what's going to happen. And as it turns out, all these really experienced podcasters with like over 200 episodes applied. And I was kind of like, thanks for trusting me with this, but they got so much value out of it. And one thing that I saw a lot was they didn't have their own website off of like Anchor or something like that. And if you want to do what you and I are talking about, where it's like get all this great juice out of blogging, you have to have your own, use it yourself. You get like, thank you for advertising for Anchor. I hope that, that's giving everybody some awesomeness. But anyway, I hope that was helpful as far as like making mistakes, but
absolutely. You need to park it somewhere because what you might not realize, you might be getting into podcasting because I don't know, could be self-serving. You might want to hear your own voice, but if you're going to use it as a lead gen tool, you really do need that place to park it. Because like you said, you were telling me about an example where 2 years or so after you had a fisherman, guys, like, come on, you can do this. If a fisherman can do this, you can do this. But he stopped his blog. And he was still getting leads. So it is
today. He's still getting leads.
Yeah. And so that is the power of having your content, parked in a very specific place, your home.
That's true. It's absolutely true.
So let's talk about this too. Like, yes, having a podcast and you're the host of the podcast, but tell us about the benefit of also being a guest.
Oh, yeah. Honestly, the biggest benefit is to understand what your guests feel like. So for someone like me, who's like, my guest experience is the number one thing. Like if I was to prioritize, it would be guest first, listeners, revenue, like it come in that order. Although the listener drives the guest. So like it's a little bit even, but if I were to optimize for one thing, it would be the guest experience. It's pretty tough to do if you have no idea what other people are doing. Having said that, I was a good couple years into podcasting before I was on other people's shows. So this is the other thing, is it takes a lot of trust just to show up to someone else's show, especially if you do, like as much as I put into like, I really care about my guests, it was like, what am I going to talk about? Does a person prepare ahead of time, And so in listening, to the show and things like that, and understanding the show itself. And, sometimes you have time to do that and sometimes you don't. And, a lot of us are doing a lot of things and pushing our boundaries. And so sometimes we find ourselves like out of our comfort zone going, I forgot to do the things I asked my own guests to do. And so there's just a lot of, I feel like a lot of insecurities about that. And I think it's good to feel it because I feel like our guests, like it gives us a different perspective on what they're going through. Also, well, it's funny. Like you're like, we're first rate. So all this talk about being a newbie and all that, like you have all the things that I worry about. I was not worried about for this. Cause number one, you get it. I feel like we're on the same page about a lot of these things and you just nailed it. But I've gone on to a lot of shows where I have no idea what's going to happen. I don't even know, like I didn't get any kind of reminder. So I'm like, are they still going to interview me? Are they going to be there when I show up? And so I felt like, wow, I'm doing a great job. So there were a couple where I was like, I should do this more often. If I start feeling bad about myself, I'm going to show up. But I also got a lot of help from other hosts, specifically when it comes to question asking. I'm just going to tell you, I've got a ton of weaknesses and I'm fully aware of them. One of them is like, I forget to ask the obvious questions. Like I'm so curious and I'm so like trying to really dig and ask a question that's different, new. And sometimes I just forget to ask like the question. When you were talking about research, before I started Next Step Nation, I did that knowing I was going to help podcasters. So I was on a mission to find out what shows do I like the most, because I really hadn't done this kind of a formal study. And okay, I know that right now it's really weird to say, I've been telling this story for a long time. Now it's a little bit different than in the past, but like I personally have never liked Joe Rogan, right? I just Fear Factor. I watched him in Fear Factor. I thought he was,
Yeah,
yeah, I feel like I'm supposed to like him. Like everybody that I likes him. And so I just felt this pressure, but I listened to his show because it's number one. I felt like I'm irresponsible if I don't at least listen to it. It was right around, I think it was before his deal or right after his deal with Spotify. I listened to an interview with Elon Musk. Or somebody, I don't know, it's somebody. And then I listen to like bits and pieces. Usually when I'm studying shows, I'll listen to certain parts of it. And so I did that on multiple episodes too, because he's the best. So I felt like I needed to hear. Number one, I didn't love the one with Elon Musk. I didn't like because I felt like they just got stoned the whole time and I wasn't digging it at all. And so I was a little bit like, oh, this is so annoying. But Joe Rogan is one of the best interviewers I've ever listened to. And he is the reason that I go on to shows and I have a concerted effort to ask the obvious question. He just does it so well. So if I start to feel like I'm overcomplicating the conversation, I'll go back and I'll listen to Joe Rogan. And honestly, now this is probably shocking to everyone listening, but it's okay to listen to people you don't agree with and appreciate what they're good at.
Yeah.
I mean, it's so crazy right now that is so not the case, but when I listen to Joe Rogan, that's it. And regardless of what his guest is saying, what he's saying, I mean, now there's this big controversy but I'm like, have they not listened to his other shows? Because I feel like there are other controversies that could come up.
Yeah.
So it really shows the political climate. I don't chase algorithms and I don't chase politics. And so I just feel like listening to him purely I appreciate
case study.
Yes.
Case study and research. Just keep it super high level. Don't get caught up in the emotion about it or who he is or what he's into. Like you're you're right. I also don't listen to him. I tried before and I'm like, he's just a bro's bro, man. Like I just don't want, and like Fear Factor, I didn't want to eat snakes and stuff. So like I wasn't about that.
I know I watched it with my eyes covered most of the time.
Like not his demo, but shame on me. Because you're right. Like I don't have the number one podcast yet.
Yeah.
But on Spotify, but you're right. You're doing your disservice.
It's a good exercise in filter. I know that we all feel like Facebook should filter everything for us. However, in the old days, like how I was trained was that we should always listen with a discerning ear. We should always listen. Like just because I'm like, why is he the best? People who don't agree with him listen to him all the time. Why is that? If you really want to know the why, you don't have to agree with all the messy stuff in the middle, nor do you have to ever listen to it again. But it's just really good if you truly are. And that's a curious mind. That is what makes a good host, is if you're okay with listening to someone and you're like, wow. I mean, believe me, I interviewed top agents. Some of them were for some areas in California. I was like, if I have to listen to this guy talk for one more second, I'm just going to jump off a bridge. Believe me, I did not ask for any more conversations after that. But it just shows how curious you are. To me, that's the ultimate level of being a host. And a lot of people are talking about mastering their craft of being a podcaster. To me, that's the epitome of that right there.
I was on a podcast and I started out being a guest before I started my own. So I went a little bit on a reverse, but I was just on a podcast and literally all it was somebody asking me a question and I was answering. And that was it. It was ask me a question and then I answered. And so for me, I'm like energetic. I like to have a conversation, but it was not a conversation. It was, Heather, answer this question. And one of the questions was, what's something that maybe a friend or a family member wouldn't know about you? And I said, well, I was on Ellen's Game of Games. And even if you don't know what Ellen's Game of Games is, you could probably understand that I said the word Ellen. So like the first question you could be like, you mean Ellen? But it was
like Ellen.
The Ellen. And but what happened was, they asked the question, I answered, and then crickets. And then I was like, I felt like I was hung out to dry. I'm like, do you want me to continue? He's like, no, that's okay. And I'm like, wait, what?
If that wasn't interesting, do we need to talk anymore? Like, I feel like
I know.
That's anyways, so bad. So, and on the flip side, I've had a guest on my show show up with 3 pages of notes. Like they asked for the list of and back during Chat and Grow, I did give a list of questions ahead of time and I stopped doing that and I will never do it again. So we use an outline and I coach people to use an outline, but I am like, do not ask, because, in your case, it really, as a guest, what a terrible experience, right? Like I would hate that.
It wasn't the best. And I have to be honest, person never followed up with me to let me know that episode aired. I don't know if it's going to air. In fact, I hope it doesn't air. That's how I felt. That's how I was left feeling. Yeah.
Yeah. Jeopardy in your own life. What is Ellen's game of games for 200? Yeah.
Right. Okay. Let's see what else. I mean, man, we've covered so much. There was one topic that I wanted to talk about really quickly is you mentioned how you use your podcast to test. How do we use podcasts to test? What are we testing messages? Are we testing offers? Like, how can we use our podcast to test?
One thing is not everybody has to do that. Like, I feel like I'm doing that so that I can provide information to other people and recommendations and sound advice.
Level. Yeah.
Well, I did it. Level. Yeah. Remember, I wasn't at that level when I started. I am a true marketer. Marketing is in fact, if you listen to my Chat and Grow, in fact, I have a blog post on my page about it with Neil Patel, and he talks about how marketing and SEO, while you want to use sound strategies, it truly is like throwing spaghetti on the wall. Like and you think that spaghetti's done. So like you're doing it. You're not just like, oh, I'm throwing spaghetti on the wall. So I hate it when it's like used in a way that's derogatory, but it's true that you don't know what's going to happen. You should know your audience so you can watch their behavior, but you really don't know. So, I don't want everybody out there thinking like, oh my gosh, I have to test. However, I don't want you to be worried about testing. You can still grow an audience by testing. In fact, I would argue that you're more likely to grow your audience if you're not afraid to try new things. Now, consistency is super important. So I don't want to downplay that. There are ways to provide consistency, and people want security, right? And especially in a time where we have none of it. And so anywhere we can find it, we're kind of more gravitated to. So that's why consistency is so important. One of the reasons. So when I do something, usually I try not to make big changes unless I make a formal season break. And, and people argue for and against. I don't care. It's worked for me and it's provided structure. So like if you watch Next Up Nation, the first batch, and there's no number of them. If I feel like something's not working, I'm going to wrap it up. And that's a season. It could be 10 episodes. It could be 50. I don't care. But when I feel like I've gotten everything I can get out of it, I'm going to write all the blog posts that need to be said on it. That season's over because I don't want to talk about it. Probably nobody wants to hear about it and we'll move on. That's usually when I'll rebrand. If I find things that I'm like, okay, I don't like those quote graphics. I don't like, I don't like the header, I don't like where we're going with this, or I want to cut this part out, or we're doing too much, or I want to move things around. I'll take a break until my break is done. And then we'll come back and we'll have those new systems in place to adjust based on what we found.
Oh, neat. Okay, cool. So you're testing out branding. You're testing out new things. That's incredible. Okay, neato. I love that. I love that. So you can use a podcast to test those things out. That's so cool. All right. Last question. With our podcast, are we trying to go after big fish? Like, are we trying to go to get Neil Patels and the Gary V's and the whoever your big people are, your big fish? Are we trying to, your rock star? Are we trying to get them off the get, or what are we doing? Are we leading up to that?
Honestly, you can do that whenever you want, because Neil Patel. Okay. And I'll tell you how I got Neil Patel, and it's really a humble way. But the thing is you want it with everything. I'm assuming everyone's time is valuable, and I'm assuming that everyone's money is valuable. And so when you go into a podcast, you want to suck the most out of it that you can for the effort that you're putting in. So what that means when it comes to guest, I call it strategic guesting, right? Ooh. So you want to really go into it understanding. When I say who you want on your show, I literally mean who you want on your show. The way that I coach my clients is you want to understand who are the collaborators, who are the potential clients, and who are your rock stars. And like, what is your value base on each one of those? When you're starting a show, I would say that 5%, these are the percentages I use. And I recommend it just because you want to start somewhere. And then again, you can adjust. You can change it if you're like, I need to move directions, because guess what? You're going to learn things as you're going. But again, keeping your true north needs to stay true north. This is what I want out of my show. If I move these percentages around, I feel like I'm going to achieve that quicker. or better or more fun, or everyone's experience is going to be better. So I typically will go in, and I prefer personally, it's like 75% potential clients. And this is a good breakaway agents. This is exactly what I used. 75% potential clients, 20% were potential collaborators. So those are people who provide services or products. They've got the same exact audience as you, like their target audience is exactly the same as you. They typically are not directly competing with you, but they have the same audience. 5% are rock stars. And when it comes to going for the rock stars, number one, it depends on your rock star. So as you're building your list of like, it would just inspire me to have this person on, know why you want the rock stars. Don't just do it because it feels good that you could, it's not a get, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
If you're doing it because, you know, this person represents the epitome of what I'm trying to say, like I listen to them. And if that person can come and share this with everyone, that's awesome. You know, are there added benefits? Of course. So they've got following. However,
Right.
a lot is put on that shouldn't be, because they also have PR people. And, you know, it's not like they're going to be like, yay, I was on Tiffany Youngren's show and everybody should listen to it. Like, it's just not going to happen. Whereas when you have other people who've got 50 followers or 200 followers, and they're saying you should go listen to that show, and you do that every week, that's going to build a lot faster. So if you really want your guests bringing their audience by being really clear about what's the benefit to both of you and how to do that effectively, like we give away a promotion guide for guests. So they get a guide that shows like, this is why you plus me promoting this equals a lot more. Yeah. And but with rock stars, you got to know that if they feel like, not all of them, because they're all different, but if there's something in it for them, like you really want to be concise, and why would they care? Why would they care to be on your show? When Neil Patel came onto my show, granted, it was before there were 2 million podcasts plus, but I had gotten probably the 1,000th email from him giving me some great advice about SEO. I responded and I said, you know, I read these. I was literally walking through the airport in Denver, and my same assistant who told me I should start a podcast said, you should have Neil Patel on your show. Wow. The next day I was walking through the airport. I got the email and I emailed back and I'm like, you know what? Every single thing you say is gold and I just appreciate it, you know, and it would be such an honor to have you on I just started this podcast. I'm nobody, but I just feel like even the people that I'm reaching, you know, I live in this, you know, town in the middle of Montana and, you know, who cares, but it would just be amazing. And what you're saying, even if I could reach the few people I could, you know, only it was like 2 sentences somehow, but that was the gist. Somehow I was able to be concise and say all that. So for me, the angle, you want to know what the angle is and how can you make that easy for them? So my angle was, I think what you say is brilliant. And can I share that with who I know? And he responded and said, whatever his assistant's name is, set this up. And so it was like, it'd been CC'd to both of us. And I'm like, oh my gosh, thank you, you know? And so, but again, it was like, I was super prepared. It was, you know, I wanted to make sure his time was really well spent. I did only get a half an hour for that one. And that's a whole nother story. Like if you want to talk about my worst experience ever podcasting, it was that day. But it, you know, I've also approached people and they're like, if you don't have 400,000 followers, he's not going to come on your show. I feel like sometimes if you somehow get their attention, it's just hard because everybody has a podcast and everybody wants everybody on their show. But if you do nothing else, know that person, like know what they notice. Like I'm going to have Ryan Serhant on my show someday, like someday that is going to happen. Yeah. But I know that if I don't call him like 5 times a week until he does it, he's not going to be on it. He's said it in one of his books before. Like it's literally what he says that someone would have to do to get his attention. And so if you know, it's like, know your audience, just like anything else. So anyway.
Yeah. Wow. Neil Patel. Well then, darn it, using that 75% clients, 20% collaborators, and 5% rock stars, I can tell you that I'm heavy on one and light on the other two. So I need to even that out.
And you think about it, if collaborators are really going to get you to your goal, then that should be 75%, you know, because usually what happens, you know, I would say that most of the people I coach collaborators is their number one thing. And then the other two are just kind of like, well, okay, that's a lot of people are like, it never even occurred to them to have clients on their show, like potential clients, or how do I provide value? Well, there's a ton of ways, like just, you get to demonstrate how you help people publicly. Like, how is that not a good thing? Like, I don't understand, and I have a whole thing about the structure of an ideal podcast episode, like how to, what to do at the beginning, which you nailed it. So you could do a class on that. And then at the end, I have what I call my 20 minutes of selfish time, and 20 minutes of gold is also what I call it, but it's my selfish time. So when I'm pitching people and I'm like, realtors, again, breakaway agent, this is when I hone this in really, really well. I would do an info call with them because they were like, are you scamming me? Like, do I have to pay something afterwards? I was like, no, this is for real. You don't have to pay. You don't have to buy anything. The only thing, they're like, well, what are you doing it for? And I was like, well, I mean, like, you are my target audience. So you are the people I want to meet. So I'm going to meet you. And then the other thing is I have 20 minutes at the end. The whole thing will not take more than an hour. Your time is super valuable, but I have 20 minutes at the end that I call selfish time. And if it makes sense to have another conversation, great. But if not, it's fine. Like, this is all about the content. And they're like, oh, seems fair enough. So if people know like what you're trying to do, they're more than agreeable because they're in business too. Like, they're having to have those conversations with other people, you know?
Yeah. And if you have a way of helping them, it's your right and responsibility to share that. I love that. Podcaster guests coming up. You are going to be hit with that 20-minute goal. I didn't even think of that. Tiffany, my gosh, you have them there. Oh, I need to write this down. I'm also taking notes.
The thing is the 20 minutes of gold is not a sales pitch. And this is the other thing that I told them. It's not going to be a sales pitch, but I do want to talk to you about, actually, it's mostly questions. So I ask 3 questions at the end, but they're selfish questions. I always ask, I'm just going to give all my secrets away. So here's the 20 minutes of gold. It's been the same for years, like literally since before I helped anyone else. This is gold. Your gold, their gold. First thing I ask is, well, like, oh, thank you. And okay, that's a wrap. The end. And then I'll be like, okay, so what was your overall impression of this experience? Oh my gosh, that was amazing. Boom, testimonial for your next guest. So at the footer of my emails, you'll always find testimonials from my guests, or you'll look at my website, you'll see testimonials from my guests, because I'll ask them immediately after, what was your overall impression? I mean, not everybody, someone will like, oh, it was good. But usually by then they've gotten reminders, they've gotten the guide. In fact, I have another giveaway that I'll usually give away as well, where it's like, whatever my latest giveaway is, I'm like, here's a direct link. You don't have to opt in because you're awesome and special. And here you go. Yeah. And don't forget. And then I have a list of like, when I do my emails, there's like a list of ways to make it sound better, tips on how to make it happen. And so by the time they're on the show, they already know what to expect. They've been given every tool that they possibly could need. At the beginning, I did just what you did today, which is, here's what to expect. I'm going to talk to you right now. Then I'm going to open it, and then I'm going to close it. And then I'm going to ask you just a couple more questions right before we leave, but it's not going to take more than an hour. And so by the time we get to the end, I've just given them this entire platform to talk about how amazing they are, sent them all these emails. They've gotten this great experience. And then it's like, and so what do you think? And then like, oh my gosh, that was great. And it really was. Like, if they don't say that, I'm like, it's like, I failed. Like, that's my moment. That's my final, right? That's my final exam. If they don't say that they had a great time, I'm like, okay, so talk to me because I need to adjust something. So that's my first question always. The second question is what was your favorite nugget? It's usually my cold open. So as soon as they say blah, 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 sometimes they'll say, you know what I forgot to mention? Boom. That's like, I get to like reuse that in something else. So before the interview, I always tell them like, I'm recording the whole time. What you say in the middle, we lightly edit. So it's just going to happen. I want it to be transparent. What you see is what you get. But afterwards, if you ever talk about anything, because I'm going to ask you a couple more questions and usually people answer the questions differently. If you ever say something that you feel like this is off the record, say it. This is not a gotcha show, but I really, at the end, I want to hear it. So they're like, okay, fine. So then we get to the end and I'm like, overall impression, what was your favorite nugget? Boom. I always have instructions for my team that cut that part out because we're going to put it at the beginning of the show, probably. Then third question, that is your number one sales conversion question. So like, So when it comes to market, this is what I asked for breakaway agents. So when it comes to marketing, what is your biggest issue? Now, mind you, I always ask that during my interview. So they've already answered this question. I think I can safely say 0 of my guests said the same thing during the show publicly as what they said after the show. I really got to hear like, oh, you know what? Right now, blah, blah, blah. Like they're boom, laying it out. And so I was like, well, would it make sense if we had another conversation after this and talk more about how to solve that? Boom. And not like I'm trying to, I publicly say this on podcasts all day long. So it's not like I'm not trying to trick anybody. And I tell them I'm going to ask these questions, but how valuable is it to ask that instead of like, they've just spilled their guts out. Do they really need to make a decision about what kind of marketing they're going to do? They just need to make a decision did you like that last hour? Because I did. Can we talk more? Yes or no? And I always tell them, I don't invite everybody. Like, this isn't something that everybody gets invited to the party and you might not want to, but that interview is a beautiful moment in time to go, would I like to work with you? Would you like to work with me? Should we even talk about it? And people want that. They want to know. It's like a trial, So anyway, that was like a session just now, but it really is the magic of how the relationship goes. So
I am so grateful for that nugget. Thank you for spilling the beans there, because I didn't know any of that. Like that, my word of 2022 is finesse, because I've gotten myself to a level. Now I want to dial it in. And that, my friends, gives me goosebumps right now, but that is how you dial it in. That is finesse right there, my friend. Thank you for sharing that.
You're welcome.
Speaking of the close and how we can work with you, Tiffany, because we've been spending almost an hour together. You have given us so much information. How can we work with you?
Well, I work both podcasters and I work with agencies. So if you're out there and you're like, I'm a podcaster, I just want some help, I have what I call my Hostmaster program. So it is 90 days to become a Hostmaster, where not only do I make sure you've got the assets in place, and like, I don't, people like Heather could probably help with, creating those assets, but a lot of podcasters skip a lot of those steps. So I'm coaching through, how do you find your target audience? How do you develop what we call the audience promise, so that you're delivering the transformation? You're telling the audience what their transformation is. So 90 days to get that set up. And then they get a trial of our show development and guesting platform as well. So that is for podcasters. So just go to omhagency.com or go to podcasthostmaster.com and you can learn all about that program. In fact, if you go to Podcast Hostmaster, you also get a guide on how to find the best guests. So there's that. Awesome. And then if you're an agency, just reach out to me at OMH Agency and I can give you a free demo on the platform. I just kind of hand it over, and then I support the clients in becoming a better host and making the most out of the relationships that they're building. So.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Yeah. We're going to have all the links, the show links, because of course, kids, this goes on a blog. It is going to be at HollowayMediaServices.com. So you can see all of those links and more. You can see Tiffany's beautiful picture and all of the links back to her website. Tiffany, this has been such an impressive hour. I say that because you've made an impression on me. You've taught me as I'm entering into this podcast world. And yes, everybody and their uncle has a podcast, but it's a very viable form of marketing. And I now can go forth more confidently, my friend, because you've just given us so much value. Thank you.
Good. Excellent. Well, I appreciate the opportunity to talk about it, because obviously I get really excited about all that. So.
I know. That's why I want to bring you on here, because you do get so jazzed and you are so experienced and you've done it. You've done it all. I mean, from soup to nuts, you have created this system. So again, Tiffany Youngren, podcast marketing expert with OMH Agency. You can find her on LinkedIn and Facebook and Instagram, omhagency.com. Of course, all of her contact links are going to be here below and on our blog. So thank you, Tiffany, so much for helping us out today.
You're so welcome. And Heather, thank you for inviting me again. And thanks to everyone who's listening. I think there's a lot to be said for really investing by listening to what Heather has to say. And you've got amazing guests. So to be one of them, I just really appreciate it.
Oh, you're so sweet. Thank you so much. I'm Heather Holloway, and you've been listening to Practical Talk. Thank you so much for joining our conversation. Check the show notes for resources from our guests and links to other episodes. New episodes are released every Wednesday.